Yeah, that's
Hello.
good.
This is
Hello,
this is
Pete.
Cybercon, and this is Otherworldly, the Changing Times, Changing Worlds show, keeping the Changing Times, Changing Worlds topics that we cover in the member conference, available all year long. Divination, magic, complementary and alternative healing, ghosts, other supernatural beings, spiritual practices, and if it's called supernatural, paranormal, metaphysical, or occult, we figure it's time to bring it out and out of the shadows and share it. I am Chip Khan. I am your host. Tonight, the guest who's going to be doing most of the speaking is Starwolf, or Sean Kane, and he's got Starwolf up right now. And we're going to be talking about being getting beyond the stereotype of being a male witch. Starwolf, having been a male witch for over 50 years, is able to address that. So take it away, Starwolf. And
well, I'm going to give you a short rambling background of where I started. I started 50 years ago, and yes, for some people that's before they were born, with a copy of Paul Huson's Mastering Witchcraft, which is one of the few occult books available in the public library. The other ones were a bunch of Hans Holzer ghost hunting books and a copy of A.E. Wyatt's book on ceremonial magic, which was ridiculously complicated and expensive to do. But I started with that one. Ages, like I said, ages ago in the, well, thankfully there was also this thing that I would buy every month at the tobacco and newspaper store on my way home from junior high school, which says how long ago that was, called Fate Magazine, which gave me my first introduction to more than what I was able to obtain. And yes, I've basically always been something of a witch. I created what I refer to as an alchemy lab back when I was somewhat younger, endless little 35 millimeter film cans filled with all sorts of herbs and things that were that I thought would actually work. And well, I've grown from there. But what I did was, hold on, I think I'm going to need to keep, excuse me, I need to go over to chat so that I can answer questions. Yep, that one. And it's still available. Yes, back when it was referred to as a practical guide for witches, warlocks, and covens. That in itself being something of an oxymoron, because a practical guide for any of us is perhaps a bit more than we can think of, but it's actually a very good book in that it gives you a basis of what I guess is now called British traditional witchcraft, because it's a mixture of folk magic and a certain amount of ceremonial magic, and it doesn't do a whole lot of the, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, which for a somewhat homicidal 14-year-old was perfect, or perhaps a little too perfect. $35 for a paperback I spent $3.50 on. Wow. But what Fate Magazine gave me was the address of an occult store in Brooklyn. At the time, we were living on Long Island, so that was one of my first independent trips without family around me, called the Warlock Shop, which involved basically train into Manhattan, bus down to the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge, cross the bridge, bus and Shanks ponies up to the Warlock Shop, which was in Brooklyn. So that was my beginning. technically not supposed to be let in because there was a big sign, you must be 18 or above in order to come in. But I was standing there with my nose pressed against the door, my copy of Mastering Witchcraft in my hand, and my shopping list of herbs I couldn't find at the grocery store. And they, yep, got that one. Yeah, Book of Ceremonial Magic and Pacts. Obviously, it's been edited, but yes, that's another one that is still sitting downstairs in the library. Well, I thought it was DJ Conway, but okay. But yes,
DJ.
that was the beginning of my occult career back in the good old days, and eventually ended up working in first the Warlock shop, and then it's later at Manhattan. Well, Jane, I didn't have a grandmother who could teach me, so I had to learn from books. And a lot of it was learning the hard way. In other words, not blowing myself up, but managing to leave some serious dents in the fabric of space-time in various places.
Like you do.
Yeah, well, yeah, surviving I started out as a solitary witch because there wasn't anybody else.
Yep.
I mean, I got my contact later when I was working in, like I said, in the basement of the Warlock shop, mixing powders and oils and incenses and pretty much everything. And then later, when the Warlock shop moved to Manhattan and became the Magical Child, I was still, at that point, what was my part-time job? I didn't have a paper route. I basically was Severus Snape. I was in the basement and I was mixing things. So that's the beginning. Many years of moving from, now fast forward about 10 plus years, when Starhawk brought out The Spiral Dance, which was an excellent, it's still a good book, but she got a little too California political for me. So I have moved on from what was originally the fairy tradition until somebody copyrighted the name and they had to change it to reclaiming. And then, so I've defined myself at this point a heathen witch. I don't bother using, Norse titles because I'm living in the 21st century America. When I want to dress up like a Viking, I'll go to an SCA event. Okay. Through the years, I've run into a lot, especially a good deal of the hyper-feminist witchcraft. I do not call myself a warlock, mostly because it doesn't seem to fit. I understand from my research and from reading it, warlock comes from the title, which basically means a traitor. And while I've never really had an official coven to be part of, I mean, I've been in a bunch of various groups that have evolved and then kind of dropped as people get other interests, other things. I just keep moving on, kind of obeying the laws of motion that until I act up, something acts upon me, I keep going in the same direction. Shamanism arrived in my life about 30 years ago when I picked up Michael Harner's Way of the Shaman, and that was kind of like coming home. The good news is, yeah, his techniques work. Thank you. By the way, thank you, Chipicon, for giving me well, okay, given wider by Sir Walter Scott. Okay. Like I said, I am not a linguist. I managed a gentleman's C in the one linguistics class I had to take to get my my bachelor's degree. But I have been, well, like I said, I am a male witch. I am something of a sorcerer because I do use sorcery, but I define it this way. Witch is a job description. Witchcraft is a skill set. Wicca is a religion. Pick a minimum of two. You can be a Wiccan who never casts a spell, therefore never actually does witchcraft. You can be a witch who is entirely does, is a spellcaster, but never, mentions the triple goddess or the horned god or anything, and you're still a witch. At least that's my definition. It's a job description. Given that Wicca, face it, the roots of Wicca are only slightly less tenuous than those of Burnham Wood. Yes, I'm stealing from Board of the Rings at this point. Given that we know we can trace Wicca back to the 50s, but beyond that, we only have Gardner's word for it, and it's amazing how much of it reads like something out of one of Crowley's books or out of the Golden Dawn. So yes, I also consider crazy Uncle Alistair as one of my spiritual ancestors, because so much of what he given that both Crowley and Gardner were members of the Golden Dawn, and they cross-pollinated and you name it. Okay, well, that about covers me. I am here now. I am thanks to Chipicon, I am a Runevalder master. I read runes, I read tarot cards. I occasionally work with herbs. I don't do a whole lot of burning of them because of my wife's asthma and the fact that I have inhaled so much burning sage over the last 50 years that that I am almost developing an allergy to it. I can eat it, I just don't really want to be around it when it's burning.
I have heard that it's about 10% of the New Age neo-pagans are now have allergies to the burning sage because they've been overexposed.
I've been finding other things I can burn. For example, for dealing with ghosts, I burn rosemary. For general purification, I tend to use sound, as in a singing bowl or a bell. And for other things, if you must have me burning something, I'll probably burn thyme or bay leaves, things that will not make my nose start to run.
Well, I'm going to throw in here just a little bit of historical trivia. The Anglo-Saxons called burning herbs reeking, which I tend to think of when we're thinking of burning tobacco or sage or anything. It's like, okay, you're reeking it. It's like, but
I also do burn
it means smoke. Another bit of trivia is that Wicca derives from the Old English, but in Old English, the double C was pronounced ch. So Wicca, what we read now as Wicca is the religion, but the Old English word spelled the same way is witcha, and it means a male witch, which with a E, W-I-C-C-E, is the female witch. But there's trivia nobody needed to know. But if you
I've learned something today, so the day is not wasted.
No, and that's really interesting to give it a handle. And I'm glad to see the warlock business clarified, because I've never liked the name either. And
I work on the idea that we're all witches.
Well,
some of us are female, some of us are male. That, and once again, giving my witches a job description definition. because that's one of the other things that really gets me is the constant fictional idea that witches are some sort of different species or
Right.
subspecies of human. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, anybody can be a witch if you are willing to do the work.
And the fun stuff is when you spend your life doing a witchery at a fairly half-assed level,
Hmm.
because you don't realize you're doing witchery. And
Well,
you know,
everybody does magic. That's simply a technology we haven't quantified and isn't in the mainstream.
right.
But
And I look at it because you talk, of course I laugh and anybody says, well, this was 50 years ago. I remember then. And you were blowing holes in space-time. I was playing with a chemistry set and blowing holes in my lab table.
well, I did that too, but that was the other things I did.
Yeah, well,
Thankfully I could not acquire the Gilbert Atomic Energy Lab kit. My parents at least had a little bit of common sense, and I couldn't talk any of the other relatives into buying me things that had uranium ore in it. And
yeah. But we ought to, people like you and I, Starwolf, ought to put together a group who meditate upon the question, how the frick did I just survive growing up?
the
And
blessings of the gods and sheer dumb luck.
yeah, that's probably it.
Gods
Yeah.
look out for fools and small children.
Yes. Though I will say this, when I was a child, back in the single digits, I did spend a lot of time, especially in the early single digits, boring people with my adventures with both Nighthawk, which I used to meet when my mother and I would go up on the roof of our building in New Haven for her to hang the laundry, and I was talking to Nighthawks that weren't there, at least as far as she was concerned, and also talking to a big albino buffalo, which used to be a very big friend, and that's another portion, which is one of the reasons I still do shamanic work, because they don't stop talking.
Mm.
Yeah, Bell Book and Candle is perhaps a little bit better description than Bewitched, because Bewitched turns us into a bunch of superpowered jet setters, which I really wish we were, because I probably wouldn't be diabetic at this point.
Yeah, nice idea, but I think that the quick left turn happened in the 70s, which some of us remember.
Yeah.
With the feminist witchcraft movement.
Oh yeah, one of my old sparring partners, Z.
Well, let's talk about Z Budapest and the movement.
Well, basically, the feminist end of Wicca, Dianic witchcraft, kind of grew out of a collision of 60s and 70s feminism with basically Italian strega, if you look at it. The I'm trying to come up with the right words without being insulting. You had it was one of those times, and we still seem to be in them, of women trying to reclaim their power from what was basically an out of control Judeo-Christian patriarchy. We were in the middle. We had the Vietnam War. We were constantly on edge that we might, somebody might push the button and start the big one. And it was very much an outgrowth of the counterculture. But Dianic witchcraft, and I recognize that there do need to sometimes be gender-specific Wiccan groups, because not everybody's comfortable with everybody else, which is one of the reasons I'm still mostly solitary. It grew from simply empowering to the idea that, oh, we don't need men at all. And Z took, because of things she experienced in Eastern Europe, took it to the ultimate extreme. Indeed, I heard at one time we were planning for a metaphysical conference that lasted a couple of years and then died for various reasons. Yes, the old fish with a bicycle line, yes. One I oddly enough use every time somebody tries to get me into a maypole dance, because I'm 60 years old, married, and don't really need a pairing off game. But it, at times it got real downright vicious, because as I was saying, when we were planning, somebody had an idea, why don't we invite Z Budapest to speak? What will we need? And two of us immediately said flak vests for every man in the audience when she lectures.
Kind of, yeah.
Yes, because she was at her. Now understand, Z is a contemporary of Starhawks. They were both in the original Holy Terrors back in California in the 70s. And one of my teachers, Bone Blossom, was also in there. So Z is kind of my, she's another one of my really weird aunties, as it were. Though personally, if I'm doing ritual, I tend to use Buckland's Saxon witchcraft with certain transliterations that fit my own mindset. So I have Odin and Freya as the god and the goddess. Yes, I'm not mentioning Frigga because Ray is another one of the people that I was sort of one of my teachers, in that I went to several lectures from him, and he would show up at the Child regularly because he lived on Long Island too, back in the day. So now I'm wandering, but the problem was when people were trying to basically take the concept of witch as it can only be women, and it can only be women who don't like men. No offense, I don't want to live in a cottage in the woods, but I want to live in an apartment stuffed with books and cats and weird herbs somewheres, because I'm also in. Yes.
Weird crystals and herbs and.
Yes. Yes. One of the advantages of doing a certain amount of housekeeping is that I am finding all sorts of things that got bought and put in corners, and they got buried. Yes, I found my jar of curry paste this afternoon.
Ooh, yay.
Well, yeah, I knew I'd bought one and I couldn't find it. It was in a bag somewhere. I've also discovered just how many spindles I own at this point.
How many?
At last count, I have 7. Only one of which is currently in use because I'm trying to rebuild my spinning bag. I had one because I was told by Odin in a loud voice that I needed, or it might have been Ord, I'm not quite sure. Yes, I've got those books, by the way, in that I needed to learn to spin. So I've learned to hand spin using a drop spindle. And a couple of years ago, my car was broken into. And the only thing that was stolen were the contents of my spinning bag, which has always been strange, especially as I had burned the names of the Norns into one of the spindles.
Oh.
Right now, I only spin wool. I haven't learned to spin flax yet. Part of the problem was rebuilding my spinning bag got kind of, excuse my language, gerfucked by COVID. And now I have everything, and I've got a bag that will hold everything. And I have many, many Ziploc bags full of various kinds of roving. Thank you. Yes, given the problem is we're dealing with American feminism, not Norwegian Icelandic lore. Yeah, Margot Adler, met her a couple of times. Indeed, one of my favorite lectures was back when interface existed in Cambridge, was one given by her and Laurie Cabot in the same lecture. That was a great lecture, and I really enjoyed it.
I love Drawing Down the Moon, and there was one scene in there in particular that I especially liked, and that was a recounting of an event where a number of people converged someplace in woods, I believe, and the women went in to perform some feminine ritual in a circle. The men formed a circle, a perimeter guard, outside, kind of just barely outside of sight and range. And they were there to do the one thing they wound up having to do, which was stomp some rabid male who was bound and determined to break up the circle, because how dare these women have something to themselves. And the fact that the men would voluntarily do this to protect the sanctity of what the women were doing really impressed me.
We had something similar at one of the early rites of spring, I think perhaps inspired by that. And why I say early, it was back when it was only a long weekend and they could fit it all in another place farm up in New Hampshire.
Hmm.
That was unfortunately the one where my girlfriend at the time, we ended up having to get her down out of a tree.
Oh,
Well, there's a story.
Oh,
Yeah,
probably not
Yeah.
one worth revisiting.
that's one that is one for another time, and perhaps not this particular
Form.
this particular meeting. Unfortunately, that young lady is long gone. Jane will remember Sigrid.
I have that reminds me of the story of the rednecks who heard that those hippie pagans were going to have a circle out, and they said, and they get naked and dance around the campfire. Let's go have some fun. And what they didn't realize is that it was a circle of heathens who are just as well armed as any other redneck in the woods and do not take kindness. As they heard the snick of of the guns being locked and readied, and of course they would freaking love to have somebody to use their battle axes and swords on.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, between paganism and the SCA, we could almost do a book of, the There I Was stories about encounters with
Oh, crap,
mundanes,
there I was.
with non-pagans, with everybody who has, if I had a dime for every time I have been witnessed to in the last 50 years, I could probably buy a not so inexpensive hamburger at a non-fast food restaurant.
Not quite go to get Disneyland on it. But
No, but I could probably get a burger at Disneyland.
okay,
Baby.
I'm gonna try and redirect this back.
Yes.
Having interrupted.
No problem.
Go for it. I'm seeing.
It's me?
Yeah.
Are you asking me?
Did you
I
have
have a
something?
question. You're talking about your experience where a group of men volunteered to perform an outer protective circle around the women doing their magic, their circle. Why? I don't know exactly what that point in time was, or where our society was, but why was it necessary for men to form a protective circle around women rather than allowing women to empower themselves to protect themselves?
Well, in the case that I was citing came from Drawing Down the Moon, and we could look at the publication dates, and that's
That
a
was
fairly
the
old
late
book.
60s, early 70s.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would
Thank
believe that. And the men, I think the implication, reading between the lines, is the men knew that some of the men involved with some of the women in the circle were not happy with what the women were doing. And they intended to disrupt the circle. Because,
That makes sense. Thank you.
and
That
therefore, they volunteered. They say, well, let's show them what a real man is. And in fact, they ended up tackling some guy who came roaring in, bound and determined to storm the castle, and promptly got sat on. And they proved their point, and they did their job as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. That puts it in context, the time frame, everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just like,
Yeah, unfortunately, while Margot did update it drawing down the moon every few years since she passed, that's not happening, at least not in anything I can buy in this
Well,
reality.
I know. I do have a question for you.
Margot was awesome.
Yes, and discovering that she was the granddaughter of the Adler of Adlerian psychology was really
Oh, yes.
that was one of the high points of my life at that point. It's like,
yes.
Oh my God.
Starwolf, I want
Yes.
to home in on, we talk about being a male witch, and we've touched on this peripherally in going around, but one of the things that has affected me over the years, and it probably hit you the same way because we are similar age, is this militant feminism. And I put that, I look at people, and it's not just feminists, it's people who claim to be looking for equality, but in fact, what they're looking for is revenge.
Mm.
And you see it with oppressed minorities, you see it. And I think one of the things is that I just would like to see the world drift towards a place where more women are less hostile to the concept that 50% of the population can also do magic. And
remember, when I started, I'm going to be quite truthful. I didn't have any great commitment to the gods. I wasn't looking for equality. I was a disaffected 14-year-old male. I was looking for power.
okay.
Quite honestly, I was looking for the things that some people use other methods for, but for me, it was witchcraft. Also, didn't hurt that I was the weird kid in class.
You're not very different from men.
Yes.
I
think we were coming to look at
have a freeze up.
And I found that I had certain abilities and I could harness energies.
Mhm.
And I never, ever dissed any guy who could do this. And there were men who could do this. There were women who could do this. And we're all equal. Those of us who can harness that energy and direct it, we have a power and we have responsibility. Social responsibility, personal responsibility.
At times I have been flat out told that I can't do that. Why am I doing that? I'm a guy. Go off and play with your cars.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, I know. There is some advantages to being in my 60s but when that happens in your late teens and 20s, thankfully I had a somewhat supportive community back then. In other words, all the people who hung out at the Magical Child.
You were blessed.
Yes, and I wish
I am in your age group. I'm in the late 60s, early 70s, and even as a female, I didn't have that.
I don't think any of it. Well, that's why I never figured out I was doing witchcraft, because I had no context back then to tell me that that's what I was doing. I was immersed to my eyeballs in science from the time I was 8, and my father was a wonderful man, one of these multi-talented crafters who he and his friends built the house I grew up in. And he owned a gas station. So I grew up in.
Was he a witch?
environment-
Might have
I
been.
don't- I don't know. It's really hard to tell.
He had a lot of
survi-
distractions in his life that might have kept him from finding anything like that.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
he had
it's
also
16
been a
months.
witch in the Wayland the Smith kind of
Yeah,
school of magician, one of those creator witches who they might not call it witchcraft, but what they can do with wood and metal and
Mm.
and
tools
that-
is
He was a
something
maker.
beyond-
He was
Yeah.
a maker and he was a musician.
he was a maker and a musician.
Yeah.
He had a
actually-
major defining experience in a German war camp.
Right. He spent 16 months as a prisoner of war. So he was definitely a maker. He was a musician. And I think that essence was always there in him.
Yeah.
But of course, I never figured out, my parents obviously subscribed to a couple different book clubs. One of them was all murder mysteries from the 30s period, and the
Hmm.
other was Westerns. And I haven't figured out who read what. What I got out of the deal was things like a special yearbook for International Geophysical Year in 1957-58, and a subscription to Popular Science magazine. And I ended up with books about space and books about chemistry. So I guess I was distracted from any possibility that I was interacting with anything other than the brute physical world.
Hmm. Well, like I said, I had the advantage of finding people who trusted me and who they were supportive, though I must admit the magical child existed under a permanent storm cloud because Herman's nickname wasn't Horrible Herman for nothing. He and his partner could. You usually arrived. They were in mid tiff.
Oh,
They were one of those couples that defined themselves by what argument they were having at the time.
Sounds like Madame Blavatsky.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
okay.
That
not even-
that's an aspect of witchcraft that has, I think there's a lot of personality in the way it was set up by Gardner and spread across England and America.
Mhm.
It was a lot of little groups of cults of personality.
And it still is. I
I
run
think
into
one
that
of
in
the
pretty much every
saddest-
witch store I go into.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say that one of the effects that we see is witch wars, because as with any other marriage or romantic partnership, when there is a breakup, you get a division of her friends, his friends. And so you cannot when they've set it up to have a high priest and a high priestess, if they break up, you
There
just
goes it all.
Yeah, I've been through many of those. I survived the witch wars of the 70s. The good news is now we just flame each other on the internet. But think about for a moment you're breaking up, only as opposed to merely being nasty to each other, the two participants in the breakup are capable of, as it were, molding reality like silly putty.
Well, that's a really nice concept that we only do that via the internet.
Yes,
But we
I really
also
prefer.
Witch wars where one person finds a rival and goes in person and goes behind their back and makes fun of them and grabs all their followers and does really obnoxious stuff. And it does happen. And
You just described the occult world of New York in the late 60s and early 70s.
and that happens when even those people on the internet get together in person, and it does happen.
Until the human
I-
race evolves, we're probably going
I
to
can
continue to have it.
personally tell you that it has happened to me. The rivalry happened, and I'm sorry. That's one of the
Yep.
reasons I'm mostly solitary now.
Yep. There is a group here in Connecticut. It's not a coven, not a circle, not a kindred. It's kind of it's called Connecticut Wiccan Pagan Network. And I go to their events. I'm going to be teaching at one of their big campouts this August. But as far as being part of a group, I've been burned too many times.
Yeah.
I think most of it, the main problem is finding students to pass on what I know.
That is my main problem, because I have so much that I have done over the last, by the way, 50 years. And I learned it the hard way, and I need to find people to pass it on to, but I do not trust an awful lot of my local communities, because I have been the victim of somebody, having people stand behind my back at a gathering and make fun of me while people kind of looked on and giggled.
Yep.
And I found out about it after 2 years of this.
Oh God.
As somebody who has had that done to him himself, you have my condolences.
Same here.
Because
Also,
we talk a lot about
I've seen this for 20 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
And unfortunately,
we
that
talk a lot
person-
about perfect love and perfect trust, but I've
it isn't.
yeah.
Well,
Egos, I mean, people's real selves and their egos dive into this. I'm sorry.
Well, I
Well,
look at
it's-
it from the standpoint that this may be why I've never joined any other group anywhere in the world. I went to an introductory meeting for the Boy Scouts back when I was a kid and never really touched anything else until the SCA. But then I come to a place like here. I mean, I started dropping on Wednesdays because Jen did. And I said, all right, well, let's see what's going on here. And for those of you who are worried about passing on what you know to others, well, show up on Wednesday night. I'll be here if nothing else.
That's
And-
why I'm here.
And
That's why I'm here. That's why I'm at Changing Times. That's why I try to teach wherever I can.
right. And
And-
that's the same
And
thing.
it is
That's
when-
My thing.
unfortunate to say that I'm still walking into towering egos.
Oh yeah.
well,
Same.
And I am still seeking people or youth or middle-aged, I don't care, but
Mhm.
people who are starting into this, who need something, who find somebody they can trust,
mhm.
Mhm.
will not
Mhm.
I will not feel threatened if they have abilities beyond me. If they have abilities beyond me, I'm going like, yes, I help
Yep.
them connect. I'm
Well,
not
yeah,
If my students end up better than me, then
I
I've done
did
my
my
job
job.
right.
Yes,
Yes.
I did my job.
And there's
Exactly.
no better feeling for a teacher than to
Mhm.
see a student do something you can't do.
Yes.
Yep.
And you say, I helped
That-
him do. Yeah, that's why you do it.
That is it.
Exactly.
And I just feel like I'm getting old.
Yeah.
I'm getting older. I'm, okay, I'm past full, so
Yeah. We're both heading
Security
on in.
benefits.
A
I
lot
am
of us here
a-
are heading on into we are no longer the spry young things we were. We're the
No.
ones supposed to be able to sit back and watch the next generation do it, but
And
almost because of the internet has so much information and so much disinformation.
information.
And it both
That-
homogenizes and divides the quality
Yeah.
of information that's out there.
Yes.
I am
Yeah.
trying to find in my local community younger people who I can pass it on. I don't care if they're 60 or 50 or 40 or 30 or whatever. I just want to find people that I can say, here's what I've learned over a very hard one thing.
Mhm.
I don't care if you're male or female. It doesn't matter, because men are as powerful as women. Women are as powerful as men. Hello, there is no patriarchy, matriarchy. Just get over it.
Yeah.
Thank
Bill-
you.
Bill and I married late-ish, and we've not had children, and there are no grandchildren in my family at all. None of my
No,
siblings has
not
had
one.
kids. There are some on Bill's side, but we're not connected with them really.
Yeah.
And so I have no one to pass things on to.
Right.
I've got a
Because-
niece
I
that I'm
don't have that
teaching and a
either
couple of other
from
people.
a genetic thing. And I have been trying to make connections through community to find somebody, because I don't want what the hell I have learned or accomplished. I don't want it to be lost. I
Mhm.
have
Right.
it out.
Yeah, I don't write books
And I will
because
continue. I will
everything
stop
I learned,
trailing
everything I
this
have,
thing.
I've learned from somebody else.
Right.
You know, it would be a huge book with another book that would be entirely footnotes and bibliography.
Yeah,
It would almost- it
citations
would
and
almost-
references.
It would almost look like my father's PhD, where the
Yeah.
PhD was one thick volume and everything else, you know, would have filled a bloody bookshelf.
Mhm.
Also because of the tendency towards people looking at these days, because we live in a litigious society,
Mhm.
looking out for ways to say, "Oh, you violated my copyright. That's my intellectual
Yeah.
property." That's 90% of the stuff I learned is probably old enough that it should be in public domain, except
Mhm.
publishing companies keep coming up with books.
That rehash old information from other people.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
so, how would you, I mean, not just from a male perspective versus female perspective, how would you go, how can we put that knowledge out there and not let it get lost? Because if I have a stroke 3 days from now, I don't have a pupil.
Mm.
Yeah. And I don't know how much we want to get real and accept the fact that this happens. And try to imagine what percentage of all knowledge that has been learned over the ages has been lost when the
When you-
person died.
Yeah. Yeah.
How much have we actually saved?
It's not in everybody to be able to write their story
Or
out of
even
their ideas.
talk their-
I mean,
And
my book of shadows, my book of mirrors, everything is online. But but my husband is not on my path,
Mhm.
and I don't have somebody, and part of it is not just the magical pieces or the whatever, but it's the psychological stuff that allows you the insight
Mm.
Mhm.
to how the magic works or why you need to do it in a certain way. And it's very complex. And I'm not sure I would want to drop that all out there everywhere. But
Right.
my book of shadows, how do you do this going forward, whether you're male or female? Because it does not matter. It's not gender specific.
well, how you end up passing it on?
How can you do it if you've got it online, but it doesn't have a human personal recipient?
Almost may be a topic for another otherworldly.
Then
I was exactly thinking that. We
Or
will
a-
have to do this. I actually was thinking about doing it as a panel at the conference, but We
Uh,
can do
Mm.
it as
why
another
don't we
otherworldly.
why don't we plan on doing it as a panel at the conference?
Okay,
And that would
sorry,
be
I'll butt
pretty
out.
much-
No,
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 No, no, no. It's good you brought it
actually,
up.
we
no,
want
you
you to
came-
butt in, but not in
Yeah.
the next 10 minutes. But
Yeah.
because
Yeah, basically. Oh, and Kathy explained how to it, being she is the writer. You redo it in your own words, and you put attributions to it.
Yes.
Mhm.
So, and that's the way you get around copyright.
yeah, always tell people when you're borrowing some idea from another artist, even if you have rephrased it, they really
you,
love
Kathy.
being credited.
Toaster?
But yeah, as we're getting to the end, is there anyone that has questions about
Yeah.
the male-female dichotomy and the challenges of having lived? I'd like to think that feminism has come far enough that it no longer has to be quite so hostile, but I then keep bumping into them.
Yeah.
Well, there's progress in some people, but that's generally true of the human race who
Yes.
have evolved slightly. And there are feminists who now are honestly looking for, I just want to fit in the world in the proper place,
Yeah.
as opposed to, I'm going to make them pay for what they did. So,
Starwolf, did you have final thoughts on that?
Final thoughts is it's been a bumpy road. I don't regret being on it.
You can't copyright an idea. You can only copyright your particular version of it.
Yeah, what Kathy just said is you can't copyright an idea, you can only copyright your particular version of it. Which
Right.
is,
yes.
And that's more than just changing words.
In your personal experience, do you find now that there are very much more people like me who are very feminist, who are willing to reach out a right or left hand, whichever it may be, and partner with the other gender or transgenders or whatever the fuck they are, and just say, we are all united in doing what has to be done?
yes, I am very happy of that concept. I'm also happy that there are transgender witches and transgender pagans and people who are working
Embody
on
both. Yeah.
exactly.
And LGBT, all the entire spectrum of LGBTQ. We all are people. We all have what needs to be done.
What truly drives me crazy is the endless people trying to gatekeep. Whether it's in witchcraft, whether it's in heathenism, it's well, you have to do it this way and such way, or you're not a fill in the blank. And I think that's been one thing I borrowed from ceremonial magic was the idea of a magical motto. And my motto is very simply to break the chains, to shatter the walls, to wake the sleepers. That's why I don't call non-witches muggles or any of those other terms. They are sleepers. Because sleepers can be awakened.
That
And
is a
my
beautiful
job.
thought. Can you put
Oh,
that
yeah.
out? Can you
And
put that out in the text? Because I love that.
when I got
Okay,
in,
give me I'm going to start. I type very slowly, so give me a second.
That's okay. But anyone who feels that call, that pull, that energy is empowered, and they do their own thing. And we all, as a community, need to accept every single one of these souls.
it's interesting that earlier in my Zen studies, I was a big fan. Okay, good. Thanks, Starwolf. Big fan of the Mountains and Rivers Monastery, which I believe is located here in New York. And the master there, John Daido Lurie, who was a PhD in chemistry, as I recall, before he turned to Zen. And one of the most popular items of merchandise in their shop was a coffee mug that simply said, "Wake up." And I think that, if you could sum up Zen in 2 words, that's it, wake up.
The problem is so many people are frightened about waking up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Goodness knows that was
Even-
me
They're
yesterday. I
not
had a
frightened.
serious
They're
allergic
Not
attack.
so much they're frightened of waking up. They're frightened of they have been put in who they've had it drilled into them who they are.
Mhm.
They can't even wake up. They can't even recognize that other wake ups are valid. I cannot wake up into something until I have recognized that it's a legitimate thing.
Sometimes we didn't have to
It's
sleep on it a
legitimate.
bit.
I ain't gonna wake up. I can go, well, it's legitimate, but it ain't me.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then I can
And-
go, oh, it's legitimate, it ain't me, but maybe I can wake up and go, I can accept some of those things.
We don't
Here's-
have to believe all the things. We don't have to know all the things. We don't have to do all the things.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
there's-
just
and
that
then
like
was one of
there-
the most important
to-
aspects
to
of
touch on one, the basic idea of casting a circle. Some people start in the east, some people start in the north.
Mhm.
Whether it doesn't really matter where you start, as long as the results are the circle goes up and the energy is contained.
Yes, sorry, Bob.
But at the same time, you've got druids who don't cast a circle at all. I've
No.
never understood it, but what the heck, I'm not a druid.
Right.
I'm
Yeah,
not
it's interesting.
and I see the things that go the east versus north, and I go, well, yeah, they're usually political things that came about from very different Wiccan things that decided stuff. And I went, okay, do I care? Do I start it north or east? What feels right for me? And oh yeah, there's the other thing in tarot. Which one is what are spades? What are swords? I don't care. What works for you works for you.
What works for me is what I learned from Eden Gray's Pictorial Key to the Tarot, once again, a long time ago.
We talk about waking up. How about all the people that wake up and then decide they don't want to get out of bed?
Maybe they're in a phase where they're still in a cocoon and
No, there are days
need some
when I
protection
come back.
while they're
Yep.
there.
That,
There
that
are
is,
days when I would go, okay, I got a kitty cat right there behind my knees. I really don't want to get
Mhm.
up now.
Yeah.
Well,
And
yeah.
there are days when
Well,
I am
that's-
basically
my
held
hand
down
out.
by a pile of stuffed animals who do
Yeah.
not want me to get up.
Uh-huh.
That was a good definition of yesterday.
you've been
Neither
tackled.
Kathy or I accomplished much, mostly
Well-
due to,
Yeah.
I'm thinking it's the weather and the allergies.
We
I think
do
it's going around, yeah.
think I got to thank Starwolf now because he's
I need to eat things because my blood sugar and I'm
Yep.
finally getting it back under control.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
So I will see you all people next week with whatever it's going to be.
Yeah.
We're
Yep.
gonna wish it Beltane's coming up, or May Day if you don't do Beltane.
I'm going to be at
gonna
I'm going to be at a psychic fair on Beltane, so that should be fun.
I'm
Nice.
going to share the latest good news. We have now confirmed Oberon Zell, Diana
Ooh.
Paxton, Raven Caldera, and Byron Ballard as coming to speak at the conference.
Nice.
Ooh, excuse me, my tail is wagging.
Yeah,
I have to-
that's the idea. And we got to make it.
Yeah,
We
this
gotta
would
make
be
this a
my
conference
first
you can't
time to
refuse.
hear some of
But,
these.
uh,
And she freezes up.
only because the only time I ever get to talk to Raven is at these conferences. He lives in the
Right.
same town as my sister, but do I ever get up there?
Yeah, well,
It's only 65 miles.